You ever stand over the man who destroyed your life and hear him beg for mercy? I did. Right there in the middle of the Arizona desert sun, burning overhead, silence thick as judgment. The same man who once whipped me until my back bled, who branded me like cattle, was now crawling through the sand whispering one word: water. His name was Colonel Marcus Whitfield, once the devil in my nightmares, now barely a man. 3 days earlier, I was headed west, chasing the kind of freedom that feels hollow when you've got no one to share it with. Just a horse beneath me and 35 years of pain trailing behind. Then I saw the smoke thin, patchy rising behind the red rocks. I should have kept riding, but something made me stop. And I found him. He looked up at me with eyes that once watched me suffer. This time, they were afraid. I was ready to walk away. Let the desert finish what justice never did. But then he spoke. It's about Sarah, and your daughter, Sarah. My wife I thought dead. Our baby I never met. And just like that, I needed him alive. So I gave him water. Not out of mercy, not out of forgiveness, but because the truth he carried might just lead me home. And that's where our story begins. The desert has a way of stripping you bare, not just your skin under the sun, but your soul too. Out there you face yourself whether you're ready or not. I had been riding west for 3 days. Just me, a tired horse, and a silence that clung to everything. No destination beyond not here. The war was over. Lincoln had signed the paper that made men like me free. But freedom's a strange thing when you've got nowhere to go and no one to go to. Then I saw the smoke. It wasn't the kind that signals a cook fire or a peaceful camp. No, it rose in ragged spurts like something had gone wrong and the desert was trying to keep the secret. I should have kept riding. God knows I'd ignored plenty of things that weren't my business. But that smoke, it had a voice, and it called mine. When I crept through the rocks and saw him, Marcus Whitfield, my heart stopped. Not from fear, from disbelief. He was crawling. The same man who used to stride across his plantation like he owned the air, now bleeding sunburned, whispering my name like a prayer. Ezra. He looked so small, so human. And I hated that I could still see the man he used to be in the shape of his eyes. 15 years I'd imagined this moment. What I'd say, what I'd do. But now that it was real, all I could feel was heat behind my eyes and the tight pull of something too old to name. He begged for water. That was all. And I stood there staring at the man who had stolen everything from me, my youth, my wife, my child, my very name, and wondered how a person could ever deserve mercy after such cruelty. But even as I hesitated, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the sound of his breathing, raspy, thin, already half gone. Maybe it was the way the desert made him look like every dying animal I'd ever seen. Or maybe it was the way he said her name, Sarah. My hand moved on its own, pulling the water bottle from my hip. I gave him just enough to speak, not enough to heal, and when he drank, I watched the life crawl back into his voice. She's alive, he whispered. Your daughter too. The world tilted. The sand spun. For a moment I couldn't breathe. 15 years of grief cracked open like dry earth in the heat. I dropped to my knees beside him, the past and present crashing into each other like thunder. You're going to tell me everything I said? Voice low. He nodded barely, and just like that, my path west changed. I wasn't just riding toward freedom anymore. I was riding toward something I thought I'd lost forever, and the road ahead would demand more than just water and will. It would demand I carry the man who had once broken me into the heart of a truth I might not be ready for. I'd always believed that if I ever saw Marcus Whitfield again, I'd let him die slowly. I used to picture it on cold nights when the loneliness crept in. How I'd watch the light fade from his eyes the same way he watched it fade from mine over and over for 28 long years. But standing over him in the desert, everything felt different. He was broken, flesh hanging on bones, torn uniform, bleeding from wounds he likely got trying to run from the same kind of men who once hunted me. His lips were cracked, his voice barely a whisper. And in his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, I knew too well I saw something I never thought I'd see. Fear. He wasn't afraid of death. No death would have been a kindness by now. He was afraid of me. Afraid I'd become the man he once was. That I'd walk away silent and vengeful and leave him for the buzzards. And part of me wanted to. But another part. The part still shaped by Sarah's gentleness, by the songs she used to hum to our unborn child, by the memory of who I used to be before he took everything. Couldn't quite move. "Do you know who I am?" I asked. He looked hard at me, and I saw the moment it hit him. "Ezra," he breathed. "Ezra Thorne, that's right. The boy you branded like a steer, the man you tried to bury in chains." He closed his eyes, and I could almost hear the ghosts stirring behind them. Then he said the words that cracked something wide open in me. "You'd be right to leave me here. But before you go, there's something about your wife you need to know." My whole body went cold. Sarah. He was holding on to a truth I couldn't afford to lose. And I hated that he knew it. Hated more that I still wanted it. I knelt beside him, pulled the water bottle from my belt, and pressed it to his lips. He drank like a man who hadn't tasted mercy in weeks. Maybe longer. "She didn't die," he gasped. "Neither did the child. I sold them. I should have struck him then and there. Should have cursed him into the ground. But instead, I stared at the horizon and tried to steady the storm in my chest. They were alive. Somewhere in this world, Sarah was breathing. And our daughter, who I'd never held, never named, was 15 years old. That's when I understood I couldn't leave him behind. Not yet. Not because I forgave him, but because he was the only man who could lead me back to my family. "Then you're going to tell me exactly where they are," I said. "And you'd better hope you live long enough to do it." And so, in a twist, even fate couldn't have written better. I found myself reaching for the man I hated most, knowing full well the hardest part of the journey was just beginning. He said their names like they still belonged to this world. Sarah. And the child, Elena. It hit like thunder rolling low across an open plain. A name I'd never spoken, never known. For 15 years I thought both of them had vanished into dust and silence. I had no grave to visit, no proof beyond the cruel word of a man I'd long since stopped believing. And yet for all those years, I mourned like it was gospel. I buried them in the corners of my mind. I dared not wander. Now he was telling me they had lived, that my wife had survived childbirth, that my daughter had taken her first breath not in some clean house or doctor's arms, but in the dirt, under smoke and fire and betrayal. Why, I asked barely above a whisper, why would you lie to me? He didn't flinch, just stared up at the empty sky like it held the answer. Because you tried to run. Because you needed to learn that no man steals what I claimed as mine. His voice was low but steady. And there it was again, the voice of the man who once believed human beings could be owned, traded, broken. The part of Marcus Whitfield that hadn't died in the desert. He went on. Told me he sold them to a Mexican family in Santa Fe Rodriguez. Said they needed house help and paid well. Said they'd raise the child as their own. She'd be 15 now, he added. It was just another detail in a long, cruel ledger. 15. The number rattled around in my skull. 15 birthdays, 15 winters, 15 chances I never had to hear her laugh or tell her she mattered. 15 years of songs, unsung stories, untold. I imagined her face, Sarah's eyes, maybe my chin. I imagined her voice asking questions Sarah couldn't answer. I imagined her wondering why her real father never came. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Is she safe? I finally managed. He nodded, wincing as the movement pulled at the wounds in his side. They wrote to me. Letters, updates. I made arrangements. You kept track of them, I asked, disbelief knotting in my throat. I had to, he said, because I knew this day might come, that I might not make it. He spoke of a letter. One meant for Elena on her 16th birthday. A letter that would tell her the truth about Sarah, about me, about the sins he never truly washed off. If I die out here, he said, she'll never know who she really is. The cruelty of it burned hotter than the sun. that even this late her fate rested on the breath of a dying man. I looked out at the desert, stretching endlessly ahead. We had to move, because now it wasn't just my life tangled in this journey. It was hers too. The desert doesn't care who you are or what you've lost. It takes what it wants, water, strength, pride, and leaves you hollow if you don't keep moving. And now, I had no choice but to move forward, carrying the one man I never thought I'd save. Marcus Whitfield was fading fast. The arrow wounds were deep, one lodged in his side, the other a clean pass through his shoulder. I'd seen wounds like those before on the plantation, in secret men torn open by overseers, patched up in the dark by other men in chains. I'd learned how to clean, how to bind, how to keep the blood in, just long enough for the body to do its part. I shouldn't have known any of that. But Whitfield was lucky I did. "Hold still," I said, breaking the arrow shaft with one hand, bracing his chest with the other. He screamed as I pushed the head through his back and tied a torn piece of shirt around the wound. Sweat poured down his temples, but he stayed conscious. "You've done this before," he muttered, almost surprised. "Too many times," I answered. As the sun dipped lower and the temperature dropped, I wrapped him in my bedroll and sat beside him, sharing what little warmth I had. 15 years ago, I would have been whipped for laying so much as a hand on the colonel's coat. Now I was pressing my body close to his to keep him alive. "You could have left me," he said quietly. "I still might." But we both knew I wouldn't. Not until he gave me what I needed. He slept in fits, mumbling things, Sarah's name, sometimes mine. He spoke of promises made in burning houses and letters left in trusted hands. Each word pulled at me, but I didn't trust them. Not yet. At first light, I got him onto the horse. He swayed in the saddle, barely upright. I tied him down with strips of shirt and led the horse on foot. We walked in silence for miles, me with blistered feet and bleeding heels, him with the weight of 2 lives on his shoulders. "Tell me about her," I said, finally, needing to hear her name. "Elena," he whispered. "Smart. Too smart for her own good. Writes letters to newspapers. Fights for the workers. Has your fire." I closed my eyes and let the words settle in my chest. That fire, Sarah must have kept it alive in her. Even through the pain, even through the chains. Last year, Whitfield added, she convinced Miguel Rodriguez to pay the other servants wages, said no one should work for free. The irony was too bitter to laugh at. My daughter a fighter. A light in the world I thought had gone completely dark. But by midday, the heat pressed down like a judgment. Our water was almost gone. Whitfield's voice had faded again, his skin pale and waxy. And that's when I heard it, hoofbeats. Fast, methodical. Apache riders. We were being followed. The desert had tested my mercy. Now it would test my will to survive. The first sound was faint, just a rhythmic pulse beneath the wind. But I knew it. Hoofbeats, more than one rider. And they were closing in. I scanned the horizon and spotted 3 Apache warriors cresting the ridge, their silhouettes black against the sun-bleached sky. They moved with the stillness of hunters, like men who had already decided their prey wouldn't escape. I pulled Whitfield down from the saddle, his body limp and useless, barely responsive. He slumped against a rock, lips, cracked eyes barely open. "Stay quiet," I whispered, though I doubted he could hear me. "Whatever happens, don't move." I had a revolver. 6 bullets. That was it. The first warrior appeared on the left rifle, already raised. I fired without thinking. The shot cracked across the desert and dropped him where he stood. But it was like shouting into thunder. The other 2 didn't flinch. One charged from the right. I turned and fired twice. He stumbled, hit hard, and fell into the dust. But the third was already on me. We hit the ground in a tangle of limbs and fists and steel. His knife flashed, slicing through the air near my throat. He was younger, stronger, and I was already half dead from the heat. My fingers fumbled for the revolver, but he knocked it away. I fought with everything I had, rage, desperation, fear. But it wasn't enough. The blade pressed closer. Then came the gunshot. The warrior jerked backward, blood blooming on his chest. He collapsed, and behind him, barely sitting upright, pistol trembling in his hand, was Marcus Whitfield. "I couldn't let them kill you," he gasped, his voice breaking. "Not when you're so close. to finding her. He slumped forward, the pistol dropping from his grip. Blood soaked his shirt again. Whatever strength he'd summoned was gone now, spent. I crawled to him, checked the wounds. They were worse. Too much blood lost. And we were still miles from Santa Fe. How far, he asked. Maybe 6 hours, I said. He gave a weak laugh. I don't have 6 hours. But I wasn't going to let him die. Not yet. Not with the last thread to Sarah and Elena hanging from his breath. I tore apart the gear I'd taken from the Apache, lashed together, a travois, a crude sled made of wood and leather. Then I dragged him, mile by mile, step by burning step. Every muscle in my body screamed, my hands blistered, my legs shook. But I didn't stop, because for all the things Marcus Whitfield had taken from me, he was the only man who could give me back what mattered most. By the time we reached a trickling creek, he was barely conscious. I knelt, gave him water, wet his lips, and then he said something that chilled me more than the wind that was beginning to rise. Ezra, I didn't just come to die. I came to tell you the truth. He lay in the dust, face, waxy eyes, glassy, but they held a kind of urgency, a flicker of life that hadn't fully dimmed. I came to find you, Ezra, he whispered, not by accident. I came looking for you. I stared at him, the words refusing to settle. After all these years, after everything, why? You said you were passing through, I murmured. He shook his head slowly. No. I knew you'd go west after the war. You always spoke of California when you thought no one was listening. The gold, the freedom, a life you'd never had. He coughed hard, and a trail of blood slid from the corner of his mouth. Then why, I asked, still kneeling beside him. Why now? Because I'm dying, Ezra. Not from those arrows. Not really. Doctor in Richmond said I had maybe 6 weeks. Cancer. Nothing to be done. His voice faltered like it was too heavy to carry. So I rode out into this desert. Not to run, but to make something right. Before the ground takes me. His words twisted in my chest. So this is about redemption, I said bitterly. Partly. He met my gaze, but mostly, it's for her, for Elena. She deserves to know who she is, who her father is. Not just a name, a man. He struggled to reach into his coat. From inside, he pulled a folded piece of paper, yellowed soft from being opened too many times. This is a copy, he rasped. The original's with my lawyer in Santa Fe. If I die before her 16th birthday, it'll be delivered. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was his handwriting, the same hand that once signed punishment orders and sale papers. But the words, Dear Elena, your father's name is Ezra Thorne. He's the bravest man I ever knew. He tried to save you and your mother, and I punished him for it in ways that will stain my soul forever. I couldn't finish reading. My hands shook too hard. You kept this, I whispered. I wrote it the day after Sarah gave birth, he said. That same night, she saved my life. And then he told me what I never could have imagined. There was a fire in the main house. I was trapped upstairs, passed out from smoke. Sarah could have escaped, but she came back for me, dragged me out, saved me. I shook my head. She would never. She did. Collapsed on the lawn. That's when Elena was born, right there in the dirt, with the house burning behind her. He turned his head toward the sky, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. And the first thing she said, holding that child, was, promise me you'll let her grow up free. Silence fell like a shroud. I broke that promise, he said. But I'm trying to keep it now. The truth felt heavier than the desert itself. This man, this monster, was unraveling before me. And for the first time, I didn't know whether to hate him or mourn him. I wanted to hate him. I needed to. But those words, she saved me, kept circling in my mind like vultures over something I didn't want to admit. Sarah. In the middle of labor. Smoke thick in her lungs, flames licking the walls. And instead of running, she turned back. For him. For the man who branded her husband, sold her child, and treated her like property. why I'd known her bravery. I'd seen her fierce heart, the way she always reached for something better, even when everything around us was broken. But this saving Whitfield, it felt like too much grace for a man who'd shown none. I wish I could say I deserved it, he murmured, his voice rough as gravel. But the truth is I didn't. Not then. Not now. I looked at him closely. His face, once so proud, was soft now, hollowed out. Not by hunger or pain, but by guilt. He swallowed hard. There's more. I didn't want to hear more. Didn't want another twist in a story already too bent with sorrow. But I stayed still. My father, he began, voice barely audible. He owned slaves too. When I was 7, one of them tried to escape with his family. My father made me watch. Made me help tie the ropes. Said it would teach me about property, about control. I froze. 7 years old. The same age I was when Whitfield bought me. I swore I'd never become him, he whispered. But fear turns boys into monsters. He looked up at me then with eyes I didn't recognize. Not the colonel's eyes, not the slaveholder's, but a man's, a broken one. I became what I hated most, Ezra, and it's eaten me alive every day since. I didn't speak, didn't move, because I knew that kind of fear. Not from his side of the whip, but from the other end. I knew what it meant to be turned into something small, something angry, something hollow. The shadows were growing long and Santa Fe shimmered in the distance, almost like a mirage. But it was real. It was close. And so was the hardest part of this journey. I'll get you there, I said softly. You're going to finish what you started. He nodded weakly, but I saw it in his eyes. He didn't believe he'd make it. Still, he'd held on this long, carried his guilt across 100 miles of sand for the chance to tell a truth that might never be heard. I owed it to Sarah. I owed it to Elena. I owed it to the man I used to be before chains, before grief, before silence. So I bent down, lifted the travois straps again, and set my sights on the last stretch of road, the road to the blue door. Santa Fe rose from the dust like a promise, mud brick walls kissed by the last light of day, rooftops glowing red and gold beneath the desert sky. My shoulders screamed from the weight of the travois, my feet bled inside cracked boots. But I didn't stop. Not when the blue door was close. Not when the end of this road hunt might lead to a new beginning. Marcus Whitfield lay behind me, breathing shallow, drifting in and out of fever dreams. He whispered names, Sarah, Elena, sometimes mine. He spoke of roses, of songs Sarah used to hum, of letters Elena wrote but never sent. She writes every week, he said, once eyes glassy. She doesn't know where to send them, but she writes them anyway. The thought of my daughter writing to a father she believed was dead tore something open in me. Hope and grief battled in my chest, neither willing to give an inch. As we crested the final hill, I saw it. Alameda Street, third house from the corner. A faded blue door. Before I could knock, it opened. A man stood in the frame, Mexican, maybe in his 40s. His eyes took in the scene instantly. A black man, ragged from the desert, dragging another half-dead behind him. "Ay, Dios mío, help!" he shouted over his shoulder. 2 more men rushed out, and they carried Whitfield inside. I barely noticed them, because standing in that doorway was her, Sarah. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth. Her eyes, older now, lined with pain, and time widened in disbelief. Her lips trembled. "Ezra," she whispered. It was like time folded in on itself. 15 years unraveled in a single breath. She hadn't changed in all the ways that mattered. Her presence still quieted the storm in me. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Just a single step toward her. She moved first, crossing the porch like she'd been holding her breath for a decade. We didn't touch. Not yet. But we stood inches apart, suspended in something too fragile to name. "Mama?" Who was that man? A girl's voice behind her. I turned and saw her. Elena. She looked just like I'd imagined. Sarah's grace, my jaw. But her eyes, they were hers alone, wide-searching, uncertain. "You told me my father was dead," she said, eyes darting between us. Sarah swallowed hard. I told you what I had to keep you safe. From the back room, a faint voice called out, Ezra, come here. I found Whitfield lying in bed, breath shallow. Miguel Rodriguez and a doctor stood nearby, faces grim. She's beautiful, isn't she? He murmured. Sarah did good. He motioned toward a leather satchel. There's one more thing. The contract I signed, it still binds them to this place. But I can undo it. Now. His hands shook as he signed the paper that freed them. Elena stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on me. Is it true? She asked softly. Are you really my father? I nodded. Yes. She hesitated, then said, I have letters. Would you like to read them? And with that question, I knew the door to forgiveness had opened. The paper trembled in his hand. But Marcus Whitfield signed with the same careful script he once used to mark men as property. Only this time his name didn't bind a life, it set two free. I held the document in both hands. It was real, legal, final. The contract that once kept Sarah and Elena tethered to this place was now a ghost of ink and parchment. He slumped back into the pillows, spent. Maybe it doesn't fix everything, he rasped, but it's a start. From the doorway, Elena stepped into the room. In her arms was a small bundle, a stack of envelopes worn at the edges, tied with a red ribbon. I wrote to you, she said softly. Every week. For 5 years. Mama said you were gone, but I hoped. Her voice faltered. I reached out slowly, afraid even my presence might shatter this fragile moment. She handed me the letters. Would you like to read them? My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. So I nodded, and she placed them in my hands, like something sacred. Something I hadn't earned, but had been waiting for all my life. Whitfield stirred barely above a whisper. Tell her about the roses. I leaned in. His eyes, pale and fading, were locked on Elena. Tell her how her mother used to sing to them. Said they wouldn't grow without music. And tell her... His voice cracked. Tell her the man who stole her childhood is sorry. Sorrier than words can say. Those were the last words Marcus Whitfield ever spoke. He died minutes later, his breath trailing off like the last light over the desert horizon. 3 days later, we buried him in the Santa Fe cemetery. Elena insisted on laying roses from her garden on his grave. She didn't do it for him, not really. She did it for her mother, for the woman who believed in mercy even when the world didn't deserve it. And that's when I knew she truly was Sarah's daughter, and maybe mine too. The night after the funeral, I sat beside a lantern opening the first of her letters. Dear Papa, I don't know if you're alive or real, or just something I dream about, but I hope you're out there. I read them one by one. Her hopes, her fears, her questions, her anger, and always, her belief that someone was waiting for her beyond the walls of this house. 2 weeks later, the three of us rode west toward California, toward the life Sarah and I once whispered about under stars we weren't allowed to wish upon. The road ahead would be long, hard. But for the first time since I was 7 years old, I wasn't walking it alone. And every mile we traveled, I carried not just their letters, but the chance to become the man they believed I still could be. We camped beneath an open sky, stars spilling across the black like scattered embers from an old fire. The kind of quiet that settles on the desert at night isn't empty, it's thick with memory, with things unsaid. I sat cross-legged by the firelight, Elena's bundle of letters in my lap, my hands shaking as I untied the red ribbon that had held them together longer than I'd been in her life. The first one was dated 5 years ago. Dear Papa, Mama says you're gone, but I think maybe you're just lost. I hope you're warm tonight. I hope someone is kind to you. Her handwriting was careful, unsure, like she was learning how to speak to a ghost. Each letter after that felt like watching her grow, her words growing bolder, her thoughts deeper. She asked about where I might be, what I looked like, whether I liked music. She told me about the garden, about her books, about Miguel teaching her Spanish, and how she'd begun reading about the law. Why do people still have to sign contracts for freedom? If we're all born free, then why do papers decide who matters? I felt my breath catch on that one. In another, she wrote, Sometimes I dream I meet you in the marketplace. You don't recognize me at first, but then you do, and you smile. Tears blurred the ink on that page. Sarah sat beside me in silence, her hand resting lightly on mine. She hadn't read the letters either, not all of them. It was like Elena had written them into the void, trusting they'd find me when the time was right. And now here they were, each one a thread stitching a father back into the story of a daughter's life. When I finished the last one, Elena stood nearby, her arms folded, eyes wide, not afraid, just waiting for me to say something that could answer for all the time lost. But I didn't have those words, not yet. Instead, I held out the final letter. I read every word I said, and I'm sorry I wasn't there to write back. She stepped forward, slow and unsure. Then she sat beside me, her small frame wrapped in her mother's shawl. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt whole again. Not fixed, not finished, but whole. Because letters written in hope have a strange kind of power. They survive storms and silence, and even lies told by men on their deathbeds. They reach the ones we're meant to love, even when we've forgotten how to believe we still deserve them. The road west didn't wait for us. It stretched wide and quiet like it always had, unchanged by the wars we fought or the grief we carried. But this time I wasn't walking it alone. Sarah rode beside me, wrapped in that old wool shawl she'd worn the day I said goodbye and thought it was forever. Her hands held the reins with a steady grace I remembered, but her eyes carried 15 years of storms I hadn't seen. Elena rode just behind, quiet but alert, watching everything. The girl who once wrote letters to a ghost was now watching her father ride through dust and morning light, like she was trying to match the real man to the one she imagined. Sometimes I'd catch her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Not with trust, not yet. But with something like permission. Permission to begin. We didn't talk much those first days. Grief still hung around us like fog. And healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in slow moments. Like watching Sarah hum as she brewed coffee over a campfire. Or Elena asking if I could teach her how to track coyote prints. Or the way she finally called me Pa when she thought I was asleep. There was laughter too, soft, uncertain. Like we were learning a new language, one made of glances, old memories, and the hope that maybe time hadn't taken everything. We buried Whitfield under a mesquite tree before we left. Elena laid down the last of her roses and said nothing, but she stood there longer than anyone else. Not out of love, but out of understanding. Because even broken men, even cruel ones, can leave behind something worth saving. And in the end, maybe that was his final gift, giving us the chance to begin again. We traveled slow, not because the trail was hard, but because we could. No one was chasing us. No one was carrying chains. We weren't fugitives or survivors anymore. We were a family. Not the kind held together by perfect pictures or tidy stories, but the kind that survives the fire, that rides forward even when the past rides with them. I still think about the letter Elena wrote, the one where she said she dreamed I'd smile when I saw her. And I did. Every day since, because redemption isn't something you find at the end of the road. Sometimes it's the road itself. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to find your way home, please consider subscribing to our channel. We believe stories like Ezra's deserve to be told, remembered, and passed on. And if you're ready for another powerful Western tale of love, betrayal, and a second chance that came with a price, click on the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss what happens next on Legendary West Stories.